Welcome to the third video in the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada's Introduction to Stamp Collecting series. This is designed for any collectors, but specifically for beginning collectors. And in this series, we talk about some of the questions and issues that rise when you're beginning in the hobby. Today's topic is going to be whether to collect mint or used stamps. And we hope that you'll enjoy it and it will be useful. So the big question that always presents itself when you're embarking on your stamp collecting hobby is which kind of stamps should you collect? Mint stamps are more valuable, aren't they? Well, in fact, that's not always the case. You can have a stamp which is available in a mint form that actually is has been used very little on proper mail. And so in that case, there might be a good number of those stamps available mint, but in fact, they're almost never seen on mail, in which case the used version can be more valuable. In terms of collecting, it really comes down to what you want to accomplish. A lot of people are very interested in filling an album to begin with, which is, of course, the way all of us started on this journey. And of course, nothing looks prettier in an album than a page full of unused stamps. But many people just don't care, and they're perfectly happy to have their album filled side by side with mint and used. A lot of people also think, well, when I go to sell my collection, mint stamps will be more valuable. I don't ever think of my collecting interests as an investment. I get the joy out of my collection as I'm collecting it and studying it and looking at it. If it ends up being worth something to my family when the time comes that I've left this earth, that's all the better. But it's kind of like golf, right? You don't go and buy a nice set of clubs and join a nice club and take lessons and buy good shoes and all of the top equipment and pay your greens fees and think, well, when I'm retired from golf, I'm actually going to be able to recoup all this money. The enjoyment comes from the journey in it. And if there's value at the end, that's a benefit. So I wouldn't let the decision to collect mint stamps actually, as an investment, actually guide you. It really depends what you want to accomplish and what you're comfortable with. So there are things to consider when you're collecting stamps, whether and some of these will apply to new stamps and mint stamps, and some will only apply to that category, and some will apply to all of them. But there are things to take into consideration. Number one, if you're collecting a mint stamp, what condition is the gum? Has the gum been damaged? How's the centering on the stamp? Is it kind of smack dab in the middle of the sheet? Does it look like it has good margins on the outside? Margins is another thing, as we've just mentioned. Perforations. How good a condition are the perforations in? The marginal details. Are there any? Does the stamp have any faults, such as creases or tears? Has it been reperforated, or has it been repaired in some way? The coloration, is it fading, or does it have stains on it or oxidation? And last of all, what kind of cancellation does it have? Well, let's look at each one of these individually. Obviously, if you're collecting used stamps, you don't have to worry about gum. But let's talk about it in terms of mint stamps. Is the gum on the back of the stamp a cohesive whole? Has it been stuck down in a humid environment and some of the gum has been removed? Is the gum cracked? Is the gum discolored? All of those things affect the value of mint stamps. Has it been hinged? Now, of course, way back in the day, early in probably I would say before the 1980s, there weren't any hingeless albums. And so the majority of collectors hinge their stamps into their albums with hinges. One of the reasons that plate block collecting was such a big rage was because you could basically hinge the stamp into your album, the block into your album, by hinging one stamp, which left you with three stamps with no hinges on them. So I find that European collectors are much less concerned about whether a stamp had a new stamp, a mint stamp had a hinge on it, than American and North American Canadian collectors are. So does it have a hinge on the back? That can affect the value. Is the gum in any way discolored? Sometimes if gum has been in extremely humid or extremely hot or cold situations, it will discolor the gum. And this is a big one. Stamps can very easily be regummed today, and a reputable dealer or person selling the stamp will let you know that the stamp has been regummed. Experts will, of course, look at the gum and whether it's the right kind of gum and whether the strokes are the correct or not. So be careful about whether it's been regummed or not. One of the big things, regardless of whether the stamp is hinged or not, is the centering. Is the centering equal on all four sides? The better the centering, the more valuable the stamp is in terms of what you will pay for it and in terms of its grade. Are the margins wide? Are the margins equal? Does the stamp actually go into the center of the stamp actually go into the perforations on the side, or is the actual stamp itself outside the exclusive area of the perforations? Is the stamp perforated in a rare perforation? That's another thing. Some stamps can have very little value in their predominant perforation, but if the perforation is a rare or unusual one, they can be quite valuable. Another thing is the condition of the perforations. If you look at this stamp on the right side, look at the top and count in from the left on the fourth perforation at the top. That's a short perforation. Now, when you're dealing with a very rare stamp like this 3-cent Washington, they're so rare and so valuable that, of course, everybody wants perfect perforations, but it's hard to find them. But if you're dealing with a stamp that comes from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and on, a short perforation can actually affect the grade of your stamp and its value. So keep an eye on that. And last of all, does the stamp have jumbo margins? Are the margins very large? Stamp collectors love jumbo margins, and very often you'll see these advertised as jumbo because of the amount of margin around the actual stamp. Are there faults with the stamp? Has the stamp been left sitting on a desk somewhere where it's been exposed to natural light? Has it faded? Has the color been altered by the sun? Does it have non-postal cancellations on it? Things that are not postally used that appear on a stamp can really affect its value, because what we really want is stamps that have gone through the mail if we're collecting them in a used fashion. Are there thins? If the stamp is on an envelope and you don't remove it correctly, you can pull off part of the paper on the back. This is not something that can always be seen, but if the stamp were dropped in a little tray of watermark fluid, the first thing you'll see, because the paper where the thin is thinner than the rest of the paper on the stamp, it'll become immediately apparent when it's put in the watermark fluid. Does the stamp have a hole in it? Does it have a tear? Tears can be repaired. And so, again, a really good way to check for this, if you're not sure, is to put it in a little watermark fluid, and the tears will become immediately available, immediately apparent. The tears themselves, again, if you can't afford a beautiful $10,000 stamp, but you can find a really nice copy with a small tear in it to fill your album, that's probably not something that you're going to worry about unless you're interested in actually owning a perfect copy of the $10,000 version. Creases are another thing. Stamps can get bent, and these can be smoothed out, but they do compress the paper. So again, a good way to check for a crease is to just dip the stamp in some watermark fluid, because the crease will compress the paper. It'll immediately become apparent in watermark fluid. And of course, bends are another thing. A bend is very often apparent to the eye, but it can be checked the same way creases and tears can. And last of all, if the stamp has been repaired, your dealer or the seller should identify this. Cancellations are really important if you're buying used stamps. Is the cancellation an unusual one? Is it just a generic, cancel on a stamp that was used in the United States Postal Service across the board during this period? Or is it an odd cancellation that no one has seen before? On the right is penny black with a Maltese cross cancellation that was specific to a town called Wootton under Edge. And this was discovered by a man named Joseph Cottrell back in 2015. And as far as I know, it's the only example of that cancellation on a penny black. So things like cancellations can make a really interesting study, but they can also affect the value of the stamp itself. So mint or used, which to collect? Ultimately, it's your choice. And some of us begin collecting one thing, and over the course of our career, we move into another thing. We stop collecting stamps entirely. We start collecting postal history. So mint or used, it's your choice. Hinged or unhinged, again, if you want to fill an album and you're collecting used stamps, the hinge is much less of an issue. If you're collecting new stamps and you're collecting unhinged, you don't want to put a hinge on them. So you might want to find an album that's available that has a hingeless album that already provides the actual place for you to put the stamp without putting a hinge on it. What grade do you want to collect? Grading is a subjective thing. And I'm not going to take a position here on it one way or the other. But the better the grade, the more expensive the stamp. So if you're collecting to fill an album and you want a nice example and you can find it in fine condition, but maybe the margins aren't so great, perhaps that doesn't matter to you so much. Or if you only want to, collect extra fine stamps and you're willing to pay extra for them, that decision is up to you. In the end, as with all of aspects of stamp collecting, the decision is yours. What makes you happy is the route that you should take. And so this has just been a talk to give you some ideas of some of the things that might affect your decisions as you begin to collect stamps. So if you're enjoying these videos, we ask you to please like and follow the RPSC YouTube channel. Let your friends know about it. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover in this beginner series, please get in touch with us at talks@rpc.org. Last of all, if you're a collector of Canadian stamps and you're interested in the world of Canadian philately, we invite you to join the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. You can find information on this at rpsc.org.